Marjorie Stevens, President and CEO for BBB Serving Northern Indiana, and on behalf of your Better Business Bureau, we welcome you today to learn about a variety of mental health topics presented by our partners and accredited hospital, Parkview Behavioral Health Institute. Even before a global pandemic gripped the nation, the importance of creating a workplace environment that recognized, acknowledged, and promoted positive mental health was one of the most principal things an employer can do to improve their organization. Add to that the demands of the pandemic, and employers and their employees are facing a significant impact on their mental health. These Lunch and Learn webinars are just one of the ways BBB seeks to help businesses in Northern Indiana succeed. A few housekeeping items before we begin. Everyone is on mute. Please remain on mute throughout the duration of the presentation. Questions can be submitted anytime throughout the presentation via your chat box. Questions will be answered at the end of the presentation, and there will be time for additional questions. Today's content will be presented by a panel of 3 clinicians from Parkview Behavioral Health Institute. I'm pleased to welcome Jonathan Mays, Elena Mosley, and Dr. Courtney Washington to join us today. Jonathan is a licensed mental health counselor and therapist at Park Center. Elena is a licensed mental health counselor associate and doctoral candidate in the counseling psychology program at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, completing a doctoral internship through Park Center's doctoral internship program. And Dr. Washington is a licensed clinical psychologist and clinical training director at Park Center. Today's topic include avoiding isolation while working remotely, differentiating between seasonal affective disorder and other mental health diagnoses, and strategies to structure your workday. And Jonathan Mays will start us off. Jonathan and team, welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Hello, and thank you so much for inviting us. We are more than happy to be here. So this pandemic, pretty crazy. This whole year has been nuts, to say the least. But, it's brought us closer, hopefully, and it's been some goods in the chaos. But specifically what I'm going to talk to you guys about and kind of introduce the topic is isolation, isolation in the workplace, and just learning how to live life through this socially distanced world we live in now. Specifically, I want to talk about different kinds of isolations. The very first isolation is interpersonal isolation. And this is basically loneliness. Do you guys remember back in the day when we used to go to parties? We used to hang out together. Yeah. Have you ever had that experience where you were with someone and you were with a group of people, but you still felt alone? That's kind of this loneliness. I'm connected, I'm with people, but I don't feel connected to anyone specifically. That's interpersonal isolation, and we've all experienced. The next one is intrapersonal isolation. And this is more of being isolated within yourself. What I mean by that specifically is being fragmented. Have you ever had the experience I was whole once, and then this happened, and now I feel like part of me has died, or I don't feel like I'm connected anymore. This is what that is. And this happens for a variety of reasons, but trauma could be one, grief and loss, a pandemic, anything like that can cause this intra-isolation. The next is more of an existential isolation. And that idea is basically we're isolated from our ideas or how we experience life is different than how other people experience life, and we feel disconnected, or we feel like no one can quite understand what we're going through, or no one can quite understand our perspective. So that can cause feelings of isolation as well. It's important to know that we all crave connection. It's normal. Every single one of us craves connection together. We need to feel loved. We need to feel heard. We need to feel connected to. And this craving is a psychological craving as well. We feel like we need to know and be loved and be connected to. So there's a lot of we as humans desire other human connections. We are put on this earth to do life together, and people do better with others. If you guys can go to the next slide. The psychological connection is what I'm talking about. So we all have that need. If you go to the next slide one more time, this is the physiological connection. So this is more of a connection in a embodied connection. For example, how a mother connects to her newborn baby, or how a team connects to one another on a field, or even a business connects to each other when you guys are flowing in harmony and getting things done. This is because of a hormone called oxytocin. This hormone allows us to connect one to another. It's really important for us to have this. Without oxytocin, we wouldn't connect together at all. So this hormone connects us in a kind of physical, more physical, physiological point of view. Cool thing about oxytocin is it also creates another hormone, or it causes another hormone to be created or to kind of be in your body, called serotonin. And serotonin is responsible for feelings of happiness, feelings of pleasure, feelings of purpose. So in a very real sense, we need people and connection with people to be happy. Obviously, you could be happy in other ways. There's other ways to get serotonin, but connection is an important way for happiness and purpose to occur. So moving on, some strategies. You guys are business folks, so you want some strategies and tactics on how to do this. So I'm going to give you some strategies on connecting with people who aren't with you or working remotely or not in the same office. First and foremost, use methods of technology to connect to people. Something about video or face-to-face brings so much more connection and genuine, I don't know, just a genuine feeling of being heard when you can look at them in the face. But we're doing the social distance thing, we're doing this remote thing, we're doing this telehealth thing, we're doing all these things through video. So we kind of lose that connection, but it's better to do that than just phone calls or text messages or emails, because it's hard to convey tone. So I would encourage you guys to use methods of technology. So Zoom, GoToMeetings, Skype, FaceTime, Google Duo, there's a ton of them. So download one and try to connect as often as you can with your team through that medium. Next is do your best to make your workforce feel valued. So if everyone's working from home and people are stressed out or feeling kind of isolated, maybe if the budget allows, send them a care package. Maybe drop off a basket, and if, I don't know, goodies of some sort. You know, do something that makes your team feel valued, because when they're working remotely, it's easy to feel alone and isolated and not present and overheard or overlooked or whatever. So maybe drop something off in their home or have them come to the office and pick something up. And it's perfect around the holidays to do something like that too. And then be mindful that communication might be slower. So because we're working remotely, usually I could just like go to Joe's office and say, hey, Joe, I need this done. But now Joe is working from home, so I can't go to his home and say, hey, Joe, I need this done. So communication might just be slower going. So take some time to plan ahead and try to communicate more often and try to communicate before the deadline is due, because it just makes people feel more stressed when you're like, this needs to be done right now. But you're like, I don't know. Like it just causes stress. And when people feel stressed out, usually they make mistakes or they make bad decisions. So be clear. To be clear is important. To be unclear is to be unkind. So be clear to your coworkers or your employees. So that's it from more of a management or a structure for basic tips to avoid isolation. This is more along the lines of what you guys can do, what we can do as people. It's accept the reality of the situation. This pandemic is weird and it's uncomfortable and it's unpleasant and it's kind of a mess in a lot of ways. So just kind of accepting the reality of it's kind of messy, but we're all going to get through it. It's going to be okay. Eventually it's going to end one of these days. So just kind of accept that we're in the situation together and we're actually all in it together too. And then embrace your feelings. Acknowledging uncomfortable feelings can just give you power over these emotions. Silly kind of quote, but what I like to say is name it or claim it to tame it. So say it out loud, name the emotion to kind of tame that emotion. When you're feeling anxious and you say, I'm really anxious right now. And you take a deep breath, somehow it just makes you feel less anxious. So just say it. So just express it, embrace your feelings. And third, don't think feelings are positive or negative. Feelings exist to help us do something. They help us change something or solve a problem or connect with someone, or feelings exist for a purpose. They're not always positive or negative. They're kind of just feelings. They come from part of your brain that has no capacity for language or logic. It comes from your kind of your inner brain, and they're just feelings. So do what you want with them. They're not always bad. And sometimes bad feelings are helpful. So embrace it. Next, be mindful of how loneliness can manifest in you. So you might feel anxious, you might have a quick heartbeat, you might have, I don't know, tension in your body. Just if you're feeling tight, notice it. Just notice how you're feeling so you can move on. The next thing is use isolation as an opportunity to get better or to know yourself. So maybe you have time to reflect. Maybe you have time to journal. Maybe you have time to just kind of think through you and what you like about you and just the ins and outs of your personality. Also, focus on opportunities to this isolation can cause you to get things done. Maybe in this time you finish that book you've always been wanting to write, or maybe you start a business, or maybe you record a song or write a song or something. I don't know. Think through the goals that you've always wanted to accomplish but didn't have, quote, time to do it. Well, maybe you have more time now. So use this time as an investment into your future versus feeling awful. 7, find ways to relax and connect to your social network. So before the world fell apart and the pandemic occurred, try to have some sort of routine similar to that. Obviously, it's not exactly the same because we're in a global pandemic, but maybe if you got up at 7 to work out and then you ate breakfast at 8 and you went to work at 9, when you're working at home, you still do that. Maybe you take a lunch at 12, but when you're working at home, you decide to not take a lunch at 12. No, take a lunch at 12. Try to keep your rhythms and routines as similar as they used to be because it creates normalcy in your life. And finally, 8, practice self-care. Receiving constant news updates is stressful. Constantly hearing about what's happening in the world is stressful. So know when you want to listen to stuff and know when you want to engage in news and all these things, but having a constant flood of terrible things in your life or terrible news can just make you feel more overwhelmed. At least it does me. So take some time to practice self-care and just do things that you enjoy. Maybe go for a run, get your nails done, get your hair cut, something. Do something to just help take care of yourself. And Elena, with that, I'm going to move it on over to you.
Okay, thanks, Jonathan.
Yeah.
So we will be talking about differentiating between seasonal affective disorder and mental health concerns. So just a little bit of statistics. About every year, about 5% of the population actually experience depression. And of that, 4 out of 5 of the individuals that experience seasonal depression is women. The typical onset is about 20 to 30 years of age. So when we say seasonal affective disorder, we are talking about any seasonal changes in mood. So any seasonal affective disorder occurs when someone goes through a period of depression, which occurs when the seasons change. So just to give a little bit of information about depression. Depression is an abnormal mental state that affects our perceptions, our emotions, and our behaviors. So individuals who may be struggling with depression may feel sad about everything. And they often have difficult times experiencing positive emotions during those periods of sadness. However, seasonal affective disorder is typically resolved after that season ends. So when we're looking at winter or summer for seasonal affective disorder, once that season is over, we typically are able to feel more positive emotions and enjoy our social interactions. We can go back to the other side, sorry. So what it comes down to is a loss of sunlight. So when we're looking at the winter months especially, we may be feeling a lot more sad. And it typically comes down to not having as much sunlight, especially like being in the Midwest. So with that, Jonathan talked about serotonin levels. So serotonin levels, there's a lot of research that suggests that it's related to sunlight. And with that, since we're not getting the sunlight, we're not getting as much serotonin released, which is a neurotransmitter, and it affects our mood. So when we're not getting that sunlight and we're not producing enough serotonin, we may feel more depression during those times. With that, in sunlight is vitamin D levels. So we get a lot of our vitamin D from like the summer months. And in fact, a lot of times when you're in the Midwest or when you're in a state where you don't really get a lot of sunlight, we tend to be vitamin D deficient. So this may be a reason why when we go for our yearly annuals, our physicians may request those levels just to see where we fall. There's a lot of research to suggest that low vitamin D levels are related to depression. And in fact, like we're a lot lower during those winter months when we don't get the sunlight. There's also research to suggest that melatonin is linked to depression. So melatonin is that sleep-related hormone that's typically secreted during the evening times and helps us get to sleep and stay to sleep. It is responsible for our biological clock for going to sleep and waking up. So melatonin is typically increased during those winter months, which could be a reason why we may be experiencing more depression during that time. And that in turn affects our circadian rhythm. So if you're already experiencing depression and you're having low serotonin levels, low vitamin D levels, and an increase or decrease in melatonin levels, this could exacerbate your depressive symptoms. You can move to the next slide. So like I mentioned earlier, there are typically two types of seasonal depression. So one that's most common is the winter months. Typically around like December to January period where the days get seem like they're a little longer and we experience a lot less daylight, and we're typically arriving to work when the sun isn't up yet, and then when we're on our way home it seems really dark outside. So interestingly, seasonal affective disorder and depression, there's a lot of symptoms that are the same. And so typically when we look at seasonal affective disorder, we're typically given that diagnosis of depression, and then just acknowledging that it's happening during those season changes. So some symptoms that you may experience during the winter month is oversleeping. So that's like sleeping too much. You may notice that you're feeling a lot more tired during the days, overeating, and craving carbohydrates. You can also experience some weight gain. For the summer months, it's typically less common. However, it does happen, and probably likely where there's states where you still during the summer months, you might not get as much sunlight. So you can also have difficulty sleeping during the summer months. In this case, it may be trouble getting to sleep, poor appetite that results in weight loss, which is a little different from the winter seasonal affective disorder. It is important to note that in order to have a diagnosis of seasonal affective disorder, you typically have to experience those depressive symptoms for about 4 to 5 months per year. If we're looking at anything that's outside of that period or lasting longer than that season, then we're probably looking at like a major depressive episode. Seasonal affective disorder will strictly be limited to experiencing that depression and having difficulty experiencing positive moods during the winter only, and then during the summer months only. So when we're feeling depressed, and one of the things that we can move to the next slide, One of the things that we may notice when we're feeling depression is difficulty with socializing, changes in appetite, trouble with sleeping. As you can see, a lot of these symptoms are the same from seasonal affective disorder, except they are slightly different. So the trouble falling asleep or sleeping too much, a lot of times individuals might not necessarily identify with having seasonal affective disorder or depression because they may be staying up more than normal, and that makes it difficult. Typically, a lot of individuals that I've worked with are able to determine when they're feeling depressed from just like that sleeping too much piece. So waking up and still feeling tired, or sleeping excessively throughout the day. One key part of depression is that suicide piece. So having thoughts of not wanting to live or having thoughts of wanting to harm or kill yourself in some way. You may also notice that you're feeling more down, have less energy, or feeling more sluggish than normal. And another piece that it typically helps to tell you if you're feeling depressed or having some symptom of depression is losing interest in activities that you used to enjoy doing. And that's kind of like that key, and where a lot of people are able to kind of determine, like, they know something's wrong, they understand that they don't enjoy this anymore. Like, you used to enjoy painting, but all of a sudden it's something that you don't enjoy anymore. That tells you that something is going on, that there is some type of mental health piece that's probably contributing to that lack of interest in things. We can move on to the next slide. So potential red flags for employers to watch out for. I know that's something that a lot of you are probably really interested in. So when we're looking at potentially identifying when we're working with someone who's having a depressive episode or even a seasonal affective disorder, we want to look for any major changes in behavior. So that can be if you notice someone is more social and then all of a sudden you notice that they're isolating, they don't feel like talking. Those are the people that we might want to check in on and see if everything is okay. If you have someone that's typically really good at making decisions and typically do not have difficulties with decision making, that can be a sign. Any changes in mood, typically if someone, again, is having a depressive episode or a seasonal affective disorder, if you notice that they're typically happy on most days or more calm or relaxed, and you notice that they're feeling down, they're having a lot of difficulties managing their emotions, not having that energy, things like that, that would tell us that something may be going on mentally. And any changes in eating habits. If you notice that an individual has been skipping meals during lunch for multiple days, not eating, if you know that they're typically a snacker and all of a sudden they're eating a lot more or eating a lot less, that can be also a sign. Performance drop can be a big indicator too. If someone is usually meeting deadlines on time, getting a lot of tasks done during a certain period of time, and then suddenly they're struggling with keeping up, or their overall performance isn't what it used to be, such as maybe missing things, like I said, taking more time, or the quality of work has reduced, that can be a sign. Increased use of sick days, and also substance use. So substance use is that weird piece where a lot of us use it socially and for coping. However, it is like an unhealthy coping skill that we typically use. It is technically a depressant, so it helps. It does not help improve our mood. It actually helps us to stay in a depressive state. If you notice any of these signs or any of the symptoms that I mentioned with depression, it probably would be a good idea to get further evaluation by a mental health professional. Thank you. I will turn it over to Dr. Washington.
Thank you so much, Elena, and thank you, Jonathan. I'm just so grateful to both of you for being willing to engage in this with me. As Jonathan mentioned, this pandemic has been quite an experience, and we've had to change a lot of things, and this presentation style is one of the things we're adapting to. So never a dull moment and always an adventure. Also, thank you to the Better Business Bureau for helping us get this information out there, as it's clearly really, really important as everyone is kind of working in isolation right now. So what I want to talk a little bit about is the idea of mindfulness and some ideas about how that could help us, how it can help us structure our day, and the impacts that it has on both our physical and our mental health. Mindfulness is a pretty common topic these days. Lots of people talk about it. I think most people are pretty familiar with the concept. To give a kind of clinical definition, the way that we consider, or what we consider when we talk about mindfulness, is a moment-to-moment awareness of one's experience without judgment. My colleague Jonathan talked about this idea of being accepting of our emotions and our experiences in a non-judgmental way. And that is really a key piece to this idea of mindfulness, and one of the key factors that also makes it so beneficial for our mental health and our physical health as well. From this sense, mindfulness is a state, not a trait. So what that means is a trait is something that you kind of innately possess. It may be considered part of yourself. To be charismatic or funny would be considered a trait. But a state is more like a place that you occupy in a more abstract kind of a way. So this idea that you're experiencing joy, that is a state that you're experiencing. Most emotions are. So this activity of mindfulness, or the effort that you put towards being mindful, is this experience of being in a different state. It involves both being aware of this kind of reflective self, taking a step back, considering what's happening for me, which allows us to fully experience any changes in sensations. So this could be in our emotions, it could be in our environment, it could be in our bodies, right? And then again, that piece about being non-judgmental. So we're experiencing these things, we're reflecting on them without really attributing any kind of meaning, judgment, or connection to them. We're not getting fixated on things. We're really just noticing and being present in the here and now with where we are for that moment. Interestingly, mindfulness is a human ability. It's this ability, as I've been saying, to be aware of what's going around us. It helps us to not feel reactive or overwhelmed. And that's another key factor in this process, is again, we're experiencing things without judgment or connection to them. And that allows us to kind of modulate our reactions and experiences without feeling like we're losing control over things. It's a natural human ability. And just like a lot of things that humans possess that come naturally to us, we can make this innate skill better by practicing it with intention and forethought, holding space to kind of make efforts to get into these states. Okay, there's some definitions. You can go ahead and go to the next slide, please. I really just loved this image when I was researching and trying to put this part of the presentation together. It's a funny play on words, obviously, but the difference is so stark and is really palpable for me. I know I've seen an image similar to this where it talks about how, why is your dog so happy? And the human is sitting on the bench with all these things in their brain and so preoccupied with work and school and kids and all of these things, where the dog is just sitting there taking in the beautiful environment that it's surrounded by. And I think we could learn a lot of lessons like that from our furry friends, this idea of just being present and trying to quiet that mind. And this is something that's really challenging to do. I think anyone who has made a conscious effort to try and sit down and meditate, it's often very, very hard to quiet our mind. So again, the purpose of meditation, mindfulness, these types of exercise, it's really any time that we are bringing awareness to what we're experiencing through our senses or state of mind. So awareness to things that are moving through our brain, awareness to how our body is experiencing things, awareness to the situations and spaces around us. So pretty much anything that you're doing can be done mindfully. You can go to the next slide. Thank you very much. So we talk a lot about, again, how anything that you're doing can be done mindfully if you do it with intention and focus. So we can walk mindfully, we can eat mindfully, any other things. What are some other examples that people can think of? Feel free to drop some comments into the chat here and we can kind of have a Zoom dialogue, if you will. Bueller. Bueller. Oh, here we go. Okay, so how you speak to others. Absolutely, that is a great example, right? So we want to be really thoughtful about the words that we're choosing and how we choose to say them. Maybe our pace, our tone, our cadence, those kinds of things. Absolutely. Spending time with your kids, that's right. One of the things that Jonathan talked about with regard to isolation is that it is not necessarily about quantity, but about quality. And so this is the idea of really fully being present in what you're doing and who you're with. Yep. Exercising, writing, brewing coffee. I love brewing coffee. That's one of my favorite parts of the day. So yeah, thanks so much, everybody. Thanks for jumping in on that. The exchange and dialogue for me is one of the most fun parts of presenting. So this adjustment again in this crazy pandemic is an interesting experience. So, okay, so the next slide. Benefits of mindfulness. So there are a ton of them, as you can see from looking at this slide, and I'm going to break them down into two different categories as we talk about them. So one of the first ones we talked briefly about at the beginning, but this is the idea that we have a greater ability to regulate our affect. Affect is really just a fancy psychological word for feelings or emotions. That's the clinical term that we use. And obviously regulation is the ability to modulate and regulate our emotional experiences. So if you're the type of person that goes from 0 to 60 in, the snap of a finger, and you feel things really intensely and they really overwhelm you, this idea of mindfulness can help you to get better at modulating that and controlling that and being less reactive to things. That's that second tab there, being less reactive. Decrease rumination. Rumination is the idea that we get stuck in our heads and something just plays like a tape over and over and over in our brains. Very common symptom in anxiety and also depression, as my colleague Elena was speaking about. That tape is hard to stop and it's hard to interrupt. And that leads us to be distracted and not fully present in what we're doing. So mindfulness can really help us learn how to control those thought processes, slow things down, and be able to shut them off when necessary. It can increase our levels of attention and our ability to be fully present. I think that makes a lot of sense, again, given some of the things that we have previously talked about here. Decrease stress. I think we all need this, particularly in American culture, right? I think we do. We work really hard and we work long hours and we pride ourselves on our workability as Americans. And so I think we constantly feel that level of stress, whether that be from work or our home lives. And mindfulness can really help us to slow down and disconnect. And just to kind of jump over to the physical side for a moment, What the research is showing with chronic and long-term levels of stress is that it not only impacts our mental health, which I think is pretty intuitive, but it also has huge impacts on our physical health as well. We're talking about decreased immunity, so problems fighting off infections, issues with coronary disease, heart disease, blood pressure, all of those kinds of things. So anything that we can do to slow down our stress levels and decrease our stress levels is going to help us both mentally and physically. Sometimes it can be hard for us to remember. We present these things as if the brain and body are in some ways disconnected. And in fact, it's not something that's possible or that we're capable of doing. You know, we're one being. And so we really have to harness and take care of both aspects of the self there. Increased experience of more positive affect. If you're engaging in these mindfulness activities, you're being more present in your experiences, you're going to start to feel things like more gratitude and appreciation. And the acknowledgement of these things is what helps us feel them more consistently, keep them in the forefront of our awareness, and then that therefore helps to protect us against mental illness like depression and anxiety. Again, those pieces kind of flow together for me and seem to make pretty intuitive sense. We feel more connected to others, right? Just in those previous examples where we were talking about spending time in our relationships with our kids and with our loved ones, if we're fully present with them, we feel more connected to them. We feel closer, we feel more supported, right? And that in turn affects all of those neurotransmitters that Jonathan was talking about, that oxytocin, which is really our bonding chemical, and serotonin, which helps us to feel joy and happiness, okay? And then lastly, we become more flexible. Flexibility, I have learned the older that I get and the more life that I live, I really believe that flexibility is the key to life. The more flexible you can be with experiences and situations, the easier it is for us to just kind of roll with things. Physical aspects, we talked about a lot of those when we were talking about the stress component. But one thing that is really, really cool is they have done a bunch of research about long-term meditators, primarily Buddhist monks and other people who have been engaged in these practices for centuries. And what they have found is that the more mindful you are and the more meditation that you engage in, you literally rewire your brain through a concept called neuroplasticity. And this rewires the brain to experience those happy emotions more consistently. One of the biggest pieces of that is the gratitude piece. And there's a lot of research about how and if we show gratitude and acknowledge gratitude for the things that we're appreciative of, the positive effects that that has, again, on our physical and our mental health. So that's something really cool. Our brains really just blow my mind. And this idea that we can rewire them, you know, all the way up into our 90s. So, which is just a really cool thing. So it's never too late to try mindfulness. Next slide, please. Thank you so much. So some of the goals of mindfulness, and this is a pretty broad topic. In just a few slides, we're going to get to talking about some specific examples for people. But the two main goals is that attention and acceptance, right? So the goal is to tune into your experiences and focus on that present moment. Be where you are, take in what you're taking in, not worrying about what's going to happen tomorrow or what you have to do at work or the dishes that need to be done, right? You're really just being present in that moment. So this involves directing your awareness to your breath, what thoughts might be coming up for you, physical sensations within the body, and feelings that you might experience, okay? And then the other really key factor here is this idea of acceptance without judgment. So again, just as my colleagues were talking about, the goal is to observe the feelings, the thoughts, the sensations, without placing any kind of positive or negative value or connotation on it. We we do a lot of that to ourselves with the value that we place on things, right? So to feel sad is not a negative or a bad emotion. It is merely a human experience that is pretty typical for most people and appropriate at some times. Now, if you're feeling sad all the time and that's the only emotional state that you have, then as Elena shared about, we should probably follow up with some additional support or evaluation. But the idea that we have positive experiences and negative experiences, or positive feelings and negative experiences, is really something that is kind of socially constructed. And so we want to observe what we're going through without that judgment, because it is the judgment that leads us to feel like we're alone or we're pathological or that there's something wrong with us, when in fact that just isn't the case. Staying away from judgment also helps us to not respond or react to our feelings. I know that I have been really guilty of that in the past, where I feel something really strongly and my gut instinct is to just react or respond instead of taking that back, reflecting, noting them, and trying to let them go. Okay, next slide here. Okay, so some of these Jonathan covered around isolation, and I would say that it's not a coincidence that these patterns and things seem to overlap, right? So some strategies to structure your day in a mindful way. One of the most important things that we can do in our lives is to create routines. That consistency helps us build in rhythm into our day. It helps with our circadian rhythms, which is one of the things that helps us sleep consistently. And so doing things in a routine way can help us maintain structure. And, you know, just as it's important for little kids to have a bedtime routine, that's also important for adults to have. We have the same benefits from it as well. So this really ideally would include, you know, getting up, moving your body, doing some stretches or exercises, having some breakfast or coffee, and then getting ready for your work day. Even if you're working from home, it's really important to get dressed for the day as if you were going to the office. That can really help you to feel prepared and productive and those kinds of things. We want to create a harmonious environment. So this could be setting aside a workspace that is for your work, that makes it help you structure in that way. If you're not able to do that, that's okay. It could be maybe it becomes part of your routine to pull your work materials out and set up your desk or your workspace each day. And that's part of how you structure things. This could also be tidying a little bit, right? Like my colleagues will tell you I am very guilty of having a cluttered desk, right? So it can be helpful to come in and organize your stack of papers or make that list to make sure that things feel nice and harmonious. Focus your mind, try and quiet things down. Make sure that you're being intentional about what you're trying to do for that day. Again, we're noticing and observing without judgment and trying to let things go as we're doing this. Move for mental health. I cannot express enough the importance of physical activity for mental well-being. Again, this is the idea that our brains and bodies are not disconnected. There is a ton of research about how physical exercise is the most underutilized antidepressant and anti-anxiety medicine. The more that we can move and stay active, the healthier we are. It's important to set up routines for movement that are within your limits and your spectrum, right? So maybe you merely engage in stretching, and that's something that's really, really helpful for you. Maybe you like to strength train, and that's something that helps you feel good. But try to set achievable goals when it comes to movement and not pushing yourself too hard, because sometimes that can be where we fall off. I would also encourage you throughout the day to get up and move around, right? So I like to build in break times where I get up and I move through my house, my office building. Maybe you have pets, maybe you take dogs for the walk or dogs for a walk in the middle of the day to try and get outside and keep that body moving. Enjoying the micro moments. So this can be anything that is helpful for you to have a soothing moment. So taking a step back, having a cup of tea, putting lotion on your hands, doing so in a way that is, massaging and stress relieving for you. Taking a moment to step away from work and walk the dog or listen to some music as a way to kind of give yourself a little bit of a break and break up the day. Because when we're in the same environment all day, every day, things can get really tiring and monotonous. And just really try to enjoy those moments and have that gratitude in a mindful state. Breathe better to feel better. Our breath is so important, and it's something that, because it happens intuitively and as a reflex, it's not something that we necessarily think about or consider. However, changing the way your breath and attending to your breath can be a really simple way to calm yourself down or refocus yourself. So when we are feeling anxious or feeling triggered, we get brought into a breath state that is more fast-paced and is really designed by our flight, fight, freeze mechanism to help us get away from threats if we need to. And so attending to that when we're feeling anxious and breathing into our chest and shifting into breathing into our bellies or taking deep cleansing breaths through our nose and mouth can be incredibly helpful to kind of bring your system down and calm you down. Take time to connect with others, build this in, right? Reach out to a colleague. I know I'm constantly messaging my peers who I get along with here at Park Center saying like, hey, just want checking in, how are you doing, right? Take those moments to connect with other people. It might not feel the same as being at the water cooler or whatever your office is set up as, but it's still equally as important to feel that way with people. And then lastly, because we're plugged in all the time, unplug, disconnect, reboot yourself, right? Be able to check out and build those things into your day as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so these are a bunch of techniques. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go through them in detail, but they are easily Googled, and YouTube is a really amazing thing. It can help you to focus yourself and to develop these skills. So really you can Google any of these. Belly breathing is one of my favorites. It's really simple. It can be done anywhere. The intention here is to focus on breathing into your diaphragm. And so you breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth. And it can be really helpful to place one hand on your sternum and one hand on your belly as you're doing this. And you want to focus on your belly rising and falling would be the intention there. Another favorite of mine would be the 5 senses. So this can again happen anywhere. It's a very good grounding technique, but you just take a moment to observe and notice 5 things that you can see, 4 things that you can touch, 3 things that you can smell, 2 things that you can smell, sorry, and 1 thing that you can taste, okay? So that can be a really nice one as well. So those are some techniques, as I said, you can go through and look those up if you're interested. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's practice. So there was supposed to be some soothing music to go along with that. I apologize that it didn't come through. But that can give you an example of some questions to ask yourself and things to kind of think about as we're practicing these mindfulness activities. Next slide, please. Mindfulness is a superpower. Everyone can have it, so let's practice well. So I think we have, yep, so here's some resources. These are resources for this first one with the 2 columns. These are mindfulness resources. So there's a couple YouTube links, some articles of examples that you can read, and then a whole bunch of apps that are pretty highly rated. The next one here is about mental health services and resources in case you are feeling you know, upset or in need of any additional support. You can also contact Parkview Behavioral Health as well, our helpline at any time to kind of get set up. And then we have some questions. I guess rather, are there any questions? Now would be the time to kind of drop those into the chat, and we'll do our best to get through as many as we can.
Thank you very much for each of you. It's wonderful. Great information, valuable information. And please ask questions. They're here to answer. And our BBB Director of Communications, Nicole Thomas, will read them to the panelists as they come in.
We don't have any right now, but if you do, drop those in the chat and we will be happy to answer them. You guys were so good. We don't have any questions. You just covered it all.
Well, we appreciate that kudos, but highly believe that that's what's happening.
I think it's lunchtime. I think that's what it is.
I think so, right? And I think sometimes we just, like you kind of mentioned, we do get zoomed out, right? We've all these Zoom presentations are not, they're great. Although I will say today, I'd rather be on Zoom than driving in the snow. So thank you, Zoom, right?
Exactly. Well, we thank you all participants. You did a great job, and for all of you listeners out there, thanks again to our presenters, and give us a shout if there's any questions that needed to be answered. Thanks, Catherine.
Yes, Roberta asked if it'll be available for us to review, and it will be. So BBB will be taking this, we'll edit it, and then we will put it on our YouTube channel, and we will also forward it over to Parkview so that they can disseminate it if they would like. We do have a question from Lynette. She says, how do you not let this affect your work?
Oh, Lynette, that is a very good question.
Good question.
Do either of you want to take a stab at it, or do you want me to field this one?
She does qualify a little bit. She says, like, if you have ill parents or a child moving out of the house.
I think for me, and you guys can chime in if you have different thoughts. I don't know that that's a possible expectation, Lynette. I think that we are human, and the things that we are living with, dealing with, coping with affect us. And we want to try and limit that effect, right? So that we can be as productive as possible and, you know, maintain our good standing in employment and those kinds of things. But that's one of the things that I love about these mindfulness exercises, is that it's okay to be where you are. It's okay to be struggling and to be doing the best that you can. And so really acknowledging those things and then trying to let them go can help you to focus a little bit more clearly on the tasks at hand.
Another question here is, if you feel pent up, does it help to cry and get your feelings out when things begin to build up?
Yes, please cry. It sounds weird, but please cry. It's so good for you. but you have to, obviously I qualify that a little bit. If you're crying all the time and you're doing nothing but crying, then that may be not so helpful. But if you are crying all the time, just there's still hope regardless. There's always hope. There's air in your lungs, there's hope. So yes, cry, laugh, run, get angry. Being angry is good too. As long as you're not like hurting people or yourself when you're angry, being angry is fine. Again, emotions all happen for a reason. So just let them be.
Yeah, we
I would
call
say.
that like emotional release, which can be really helpful. So sometimes we do need like a good cry. And that's one of the things that is difficult for a lot of us because we have this stigma with it's not okay to not be okay, or it's not okay to cry or to be sad. It's okay to feel those emotions, and a lot of times we do. The concern comes when we're not able to, when we cry and we're still feeling down, we're still feeling pretty crappy inside. Like we would ideally like to cry about it and then maybe feel better after. But if you notice that you're doing it all the time and you're not having any change in your emotion, that would be the time where you can like reach out for help or contact a mental health professional.
Another thing too is give yourself moments to cry. So like maybe, hey, I'm going to have this pity party and it's going to be really, really pitiful. And it's going to be 30 minutes at 12 o'clock on Tuesday. And I'm just going to really be terrible for a minute. And then after that, get up and get moving and do something different. But it's okay to have scheduled cry time. Or a shower. Yeah, the shower is a great place to cry.
Exactly. I love that.
So true.
And if you take your shower in the morning, you've got your cry out in the morning, or if you take your shower at night, you can cry out all of the craziness of the day, right?
Mm-hmm.
I really
Okay.
love that structure, Jonathan. I'm sorry, Nicole, but I just really love that structure around it, right? Because I think one of the things in particular with depression is sometimes we get so stuck in doing things a certain way. And even doing one thing differently, getting up and putting pants on or brushing your hair, right, can really change the course of your entire day. So
absolutely,
I love that thought.
Good advice. Any other questions? If not, I think we'll go ahead and close. We've got some resources here, and Marjorie has a couple words for us.
Yes, again, thank you for being here today. And for those of you listening, join in on our lunch and learn sessions. We have them every month, and we're hoping that if 2021 gets back to normal, we will have some B2B meeting, B2B get-togethers. So stay tuned and watch for us and on Twitter and on Facebook and on Instagram. Thank you.